The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service presents Let's Talk Finance, a feature exploring the various elements of the economic program.
Welcome again to Let's Talk Finance here on Nationwide 90 FM. It's a new season. My name is George Davis, and I am rapping. I shall be for the next 50 minutes or so with Dr. Deloree Staple Chambers. She's the Commissioner of the Revenue Appeals Division within the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. She's in a good mood. Her team just won the World Cup, and she's here to talk not about football, but about matters concerning her portfolio. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, George.
Excellent. All right. So that France win, I suspect you're not a wagering lady, but you were confident from the start that they would have done it?
From the beginning, I had no doubt.
From the beginning, you
Le
had no
Bleu.
doubt. Le Bleu. There you go. All right, good. Let's go into it. So the Revenue Appeals Division, there was a marked change in how it went about its business in 2015. Tell us what it was that prompted that change.
Okay. In 2015, the appeals portfolio was re-engineered. Prior to that, we were known as the Taxpayer Appeals Department under the old Tax Directorate. But as you can remember, under the IMF agreement, tax was being reformed. Mm-hmm. And so the decision was taken to transform the tax appeal portfolio from being within the ambits of the portfolio of tax administration to establish the independence that should attend an appeals function, yes. Meaning that justice should be appeared to be served, mm-hmm. and not just said to be served. Mm-hmm. So if you are a part of the arm that is assessing and collecting and hearing your own appeals, then it would seem as if it is not arm's length. Mm-hmm. And so the public may not have enough confidence or the level of confidence that is required. Mm-hmm. So the decision was taken to separate the two functions. And so that came about by legislation in 2015 with the Revenue Appeals Division Act of 2015 that does the separation. And so we became a division of the Ministry of Finance with the mandate of hearing appeals or disputes between taxpayers and revenue commissioners. Revenue commissioners being the head of customs, the head of tax administration, mm-hmm. Jamaica, RPD, if necessary, and even land valuation for property tax.
Yes. So when the changes were ushered in, well, let's backtrack. One of the things that people complained about under the previous incarnation of your office were the inordinate delays it took for matters to be settled. How, in this new iteration, has that problem been addressed?
Okay. The legislation made changes or facilitated changes to our processes. Before, we had one production line for every matter. So if it is a simple case or a complex case, it had mm-hmm. to walk the same process.
Yes.
And so we were not able to implement efficiencies to turn around cases that were of simple nature versus complex nature. So the legislation built in that flexibility so that we were able to now establish different pipelines for cases. So when we get cases now, we profile them at the beginning to determine what mechanism we should use, what path we should use to resolve the appeal. Mm-hmm. And so we can turn around cases now within a matter of weeks mm-hmm. Versus months. However, even though the legislation facilitates that, because of the backlog of cases we had up mm-hmm. to that point,
yes.
we still are not able to experience the speed that we are targeting. We're looking to improve our turnaround time to be within international standard, which is 6 to 12 months for an appeal.
Yes.
Prior to the legislation, we were going 3 years. Wow. We are now at 24 months, so we have chopped off 1 year
yes.
since we implemented the legislation and the new business process. So the re-engineered business process facilitated by the modernization of the legislation facilitated that, and we're looking that by 2021 we should be within 6 to 12 months of turnaround time.
In terms of the principal officer for the entity in its previous guise, those roles and responsibilities relative to the roles and responsibilities that you as commissioner of this new nimble entity has? Compare and contrast those for me.
Well, it's basically the same. It's the same mandate. You are hearing a dispute between a taxpayer and a revenue commissioner. So it's the same legal responsibility. What we do differently is the procedure that we use to hear those matters. So before, we had to have a hearing, like a formal hearing. You have to give persons notice, legal notice, wait these 14 to 21 days for people to agree for a date just to sit down and discuss the issues. Now we can look at what is before us in terms of written submissions. So we don't have to establish formal sit-down anymore unless the parties want it. So stuff like that help to bring the matter to a close much earlier in certain circumstances. You can admit that, or you can understand that it would not be the case in at all times, because we do have our clientele varies. So it could be a little man on the street in terms of like a taxi operator or somebody with a stall, because we're all taxpayers, to the largest company in Jamaica, Grace Kennedy, Cable and Wireless. So you can imagine that we could not treat with everybody the same way.
Yes. So, all right, I'm thinking of a Western, and I love to watch Westerns. The sheriff has a particular problem, and the sheriff goes into town, assembles the town folk, and he says, all right, I deputize you, I deputize you, I deputize you, in effect giving them powers to act in his, usually it's a man sheriff, to his stead. Does the commissioner, do you, pointedly, have that power of delegation, vesting your authority into others, and how are those functions to be disposed? Right.
That was one of the change that came out of the modernized legislation. Prior, the commissioner had to be the one to sit and hear every matter. No, the commissioner can delegate to the deputies or the assistant commissioners. So that also helped to open the pipeline for processing. The commissioner is also able to instruct or to suggest to the parties that they negotiate a matter. So that too can help to speed up the resolution of disputes where both parties really don't have a strong case.
Yes.
But it makes no sense. You sit and you repeat your position, and you keep submitting the same position, and we're getting nowhere.
Yes.
So if the law is silent on, or if the way in which the assessment was raised, or the issue at the heart of the dispute was done, is not very strong on the part of the TAG, and yet still the taxpayer may not be able to prove with sufficient evidence, then they could negotiate and settle. So those are some of the things that allow the commissioner to delegate some of the authority to settle the matters.
Yeah. Is it a case that under the streamlined the streamlined umbrella that the entity now operates, that there may be cases where written submissions by the parties in dispute are sufficient for the commissioner and or his designated officials to look at them, read them, and say, all right, the decision is this. I don't need to call anybody to any meeting. I don't need to go any further in the process.
Right, yes. And we have been doing that with, since the legislation has been implemented. I think we have done maybe around 10 to 15% of the cases that
Yes, I was going to ask you what percentage of the cases accounts for that.
Right. And the more that the staff becomes, institutionalized or entrenched in how the changes in the procedures are, the more they take root, then the more we're able to, with enough confidence, get the taxpayers and or the parties to accept these modes of dispute, of resolving the dispute.
You said earlier that international standards dictate, international standards, by international standards, 6 to 12 months is the mean time for the resolution of these issues, and that you were doing maybe 36 months, but now you're down to about 24 months. Right. So for the 12 months, for the year that you have shaved from the resolution of the issue, apart from the resolution of the matters by virtue of just reading what either party has submitted or the parties to dispute have submitted, along with the powers of the commissioner now to delegate responsibilities, what other main aspect of the legislation would you point to as facilitating this reduction in the turnaround time for resolution?
Yes, the legislation also facilitated us to bring structure to how people access the appeal. Prior to the legislation, the law said you just apply in writing, and so it used to be a letter. Now, people's knowledge of tax varies. So if someone does not understand how to explain why they are in disagreement with the assessment, then it means that they will not be able to set out their grounds with any clarity or with any structure.
Yes.
So by the time we get to that file and we are about to set up a meeting, if you find that we may have to begin from scratch again to get the taxpayer to explain what is wrong with the assessment and why the appeal should be heard. So what we have done is to design forms to structure the information gathering from the very beginning. So from your filing an appeal, your mind is brought to how you set up the information to serve the appeals process. So you know there's guidance in terms of what are grounds and how the grounds are to be written. And if you are late, you will need to give an explanation to be considered, to be granted extra time to file the appeal and so on. So those that's bringing that structure to the appeal process helped a great deal in re-engineering how people access the appeals process.
I know from looking at the literature connected to the division that it is not necessary to come through the division's processes. You can go straight to the revenue court. That's correct. So how many cases do you find that have navigated the steps, that have ignored the processes through the division, gone straight to court?
None so far.
None so far, because people rather use the process.
Right, because this is an appeal process that does not require litigation. If you're going to the court, then you need the service of an attorney,
yes.
right? So this is a much cheaper alternative. And once you have the information, you can serve yourself, meaning you can come and sit down and discuss with the appeals officer, set out your reasons or your arguments, and expect to be given a fair hearing.
But the reason I asked the question is, I know that there are some importers out there who say, boy, I have this battle with the division all the time, and I'm tired of them, I go in court this time with my lawyer because I feel I get justice there. And you're saying that you've not experienced that?
No, we have not experienced that. And before the legislation changed in 2015, I think we may have had one or two times where persons went straight to the court, and the court sent them back to us.
Ooh.
Yeah.
The
good thing is that we have a very good track record, meaning that once we issue a decision, people can appeal to the court. They can further appeal our decision to the court. However, our track record is very good. Our decisions have been upheld to date. So it means that we're doing a good job.
Every person in your position, and by your, I mean you're representing your division, they always say, well, the legislation facilitates X, Y, Z, or 1 to 10. But in practice, we realize that we could do better with 1, 2, 3 more things. Are there any further tweaks to the legislation, any additional elements that you think would hasten the process of bringing our turnaround time in league with international standards, or just to make the process flow better?
Well, I can say that the piece of legislation we have now is quite robust and it's very modern. We got assistance from the World Bank, and what we did was to look at what the legislation looked like in other jurisdictions, jurisdictions that have a very good administrative process or procedure. And so what we did was to take the best of that based on our context, and we created something that we think would serve Jamaica. So as I sit here now, I can't think of anything that we could do to tweak the legislation.
Yes.
However, we can do more in terms of our business processes, in terms of applying technology, and that's the next phase of our modernization.
Yeah, and I take that to mean that you're talking about eliminating things that you have to do on paper, make them electronic.
Correct.
There you go. All right. Well, this is the first part of a 3-part series looking at the division. And I want to close it off now by saying congratulations once again. We will be back next week for another episode, and I'm sure you'll find the time to be with me. Dr. Staple Chambers, thank you very much.
Thank you, George.
All right. That's it for Let's Talk Finance. We'll be back next week with another episode.
That was Let's Talk Finance, brought to you by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service.